In this video, I'll be reading Maynard Mack's The World of Hamlet. This is without a doubt one of the most influential pieces of Shakespearean scholarship in the 20th century, and it was originally given as a talk. So here we go. The World of Hamlet. My subject is the world of Hamlet. I do not, of course, mean Denmark, except as Denmark is given a body by the play, and I do not mean Elizabethan England, though this is necessarily close behind the scenes. I mean simply the imaginative environment that the play asks us to enter when we read it or go see it. Great plays, as we know, do present us with something that can be called a world, a microcosm, a world like our own and being made of people, actions, situations, thoughts, feelings, and much more. But unlike our own in being perfectly or almost perfectly significant and coherent. In a play's world, each part implies the other part, and each lives, each means with the life and meaning of the rest. This is the reason, as we also know, that the worlds of great plays differ. Othello in Hamlet's position, we sometimes say, would have no problem. But what we are really saying is that Othello in Hamlet's position would not exist. The conception we have of Othello is a function of the characters who help define him. Desdemona, Anastiago, Cassio, and the rest. Of his history, of travel and war, of a great storm that divides his ship from Cassio's and a handkerchief, of a quiet night in Venice broken by cries about an old black ram, of a quiet night in Cyprus broken by swordplay, a quiet bedroom where a woman goes to bed in her wedding sheets and a man comes in with a light to put out the light, and above all, of a language with many voices in it, gentle, rasping, querulous, or foul, but all counterpointing the one great voice. Put up your bright swords, for the dew will rust them. O thou weed, who art so lovely fair, and smellest so sweet that the sense aches at thee, yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as monumental alabaster. I pray you, in your letters, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am, nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well, of one not easily jealous, but being overwrought, perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like the base Indian, threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe. Without his particular world of voices, persons, events, the world that both expresses and contains him, Othello is unimaginable, and so I think are Antony, King Lear, Macbeth, and Hamlet. And I'll just pause here and say, for listeners who are not familiar with Othello, that the definitive characteristic of Othello as a character, the most well-known plot point about him, is that he's tricked into acting impulsively and murdering his wife, who's actually faithful. So it's the opposite of Hamlet's situation, who delays and delays and delays and taking revenge on his uncle, who of course is in fact a villain. Back to Maynard Mack. Which is why, one more note, which is why Mack says in Hamlet's position, Othello would not exist, because had Othello received a message from the ghost, he would have immediately taken revenge. So there would be no play. That's the point. Okay, back to Maynard Mack for real this time. We come back then to Hamlet's world. Of all the tragic worlds that Shakespeare made, easily the most various and brilliant, the most elusive. It is with no thought of doing justice to it that I have singled out 3 of its attributes for comment. I know too well, if I may echo a sentiment of Mr. E.M.W. Tilliard, that no one is likely to accept another man's reading of Hamlet, that anyone who tries to throw light on one part of the play usually throws the rest into deeper shadow, and that what I have to say leaves out many problems, not to mention only one, the knotty problem of the text. All I would say in defense of the materials I have chosen is that they seem to me interesting, close to the root of the matter, even if we continue to differ about what the root of the matter is, and explanatory in a modest way of this play's peculiar hold on everyone's imagination. Its almost mythic status, one might say, as a paradigm of the life of man. And as another aside, that is simply that what Mack means to say here is that in some way, the world of Hamlet is emblematic of our world. Hamlet's problems are like our problems. his situation is evocative of ours, regardless of who we are. That's the idea here. Okay, back to Mack. The first attribute that impresses us, I think, is its mysteriousness. We often hear it said, perhaps with truth, that every great work of art has a mystery at the heart. But the mystery of Hamlet is something else. We feel its presence in the numberless explanations that have been brought forward for Hamlet's delay, his madness, his ghost, his treatment of Polonius or Ophelia or his mother, and in the controversies that still go on about whether the play is undoubtedly a failure, Eliot's phrase, or one of the greatest artistic triumphs. Whether if it is a triumph, it belongs to the highest order of tragedy. Whether if it is such a tragedy, its hero is to be taken as a man of exquisite moral sensibility, Bradley's view, or an egomaniac. Doubtless, there have been more of these controversies and explanations than the play requires. For in Hamlet, to paraphrase a remark of Falstaff's, we have a character who is not only mad in himself, but a cause of madness in the rest of us. Still, the very existence of so many theories and counter-theories, many of them formulated by sober heads, gives us food for thought. Hamlet seems to lie closer to the illogical logic of life than Shakespeare's other tragedies. And while the cause of this situation may be sought by saying that Shakespeare revised the play so often that eventually the motivations were smudged over, or that the original old play has been here or there imperfectly digested, or that the problems of Hamlet lay so close to Shakespeare's heart that he could not quite distance them in formal terms of art, we have still as critics to deal with effects, not causes. If I may quote again from Mr. Tilliard, the play's very lack of a rigorous type of causal logic seems to be part of its point. Moreover, the matter goes deeper than this. Hamlet's world is preeminently in the interrogative mood. It reverberates with questions, anguished, meditative, alarmed. There are questions that in this play, to an extent, I think unparalleled in any other. Mark the phrases and even the nuances of the action, helping to establish its peculiar baffled tone. There are other questions whose interrogations, innocent at first glance, are subsequently seen to have reached beyond their contexts to point towards some pervasive inscrutability in Hamlet's world as a whole. Such is that tense series of challenges with which the tragedy begins. Bernardo's of Francisco, who's there? Francisco's of Horatio and Marcellus, who's there? Horatio of the ghost. What art thou? And then there are the famous questions. In them, the interrogations seem to point not only beyond the context but beyond the play, out of Hamlet's predicaments into everyone's. What a piece of work is a man? And yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? To be or not to be? That is the question. Get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I am very proud, revengeful, ambitious, with more offenses at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, imagination to give them shape, or time to act them in. What should such fellows as I do, crawling between earth and heaven? Dost thou think Alexander looked o' this fashion in the earth, and smelt so? Further, Hamlet's world is a world of riddles. The hero's own language is often riddling, as the critics have pointed out. When he puns, his puns have receding depths in them. Like the one which constitutes his first speech, a little more than kin and a little less than kind. His utterances and madness, even if wild and whirling, are simultaneously, as Polonius discovers, pregnant. Do you know me, my lord? Excellent. Excellent. Well, you are a fishmonger. Even the madness itself is riddling. How much is real? How much is feigned? What does it mean? Sane or mad, Hamlet's mind plays restlessly about his world, turning up one riddle upon another. The riddle of character, for example, and how it is that in a man whose virtues else are pure as grace, some vicious mole of nature, some dram of eel, can all the noble substance off adulter. Or the riddle of the player's art, and how a man can so project himself into a fiction, a dream of passion, that he can weep for Hecuba. Or the riddle of action, how we may think too little, What to ourselves in passion we propose, says the player king. The passion ending doth the purpose lose. And again, how we may think too much. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sickled o'er with a pale cast of thought. There are more immediate riddles. His mother, how could she, on this fair mountain, leave to feed and batten on this moor? The ghost, which may be a devil, for the devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape. Ophelia, what does her behavior seem to mean? Surprising her in her closet, he falls to such a perusal of her face as he would draw it. Even the king, at his prayers, is a riddle. Will a revenge that takes him in the purging of his soul be vengeance or higher in salary? That is, step out of Mack for a moment, will it send him to heaven? As for himself, Hamlet realizes he is the greatest riddle of all, a mystery. He warns Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, from which he will not have the heart plucked out. He cannot tell why he has of late lost all his mirth, forgone all custom of exercises. Still less can he tell why he delays. I do not know why yet I live to say this thing's to do, sith I have cause and will and strength and means to do it. Thus the mysteriousness of Hamlet's world is of a piece. It is not simply a matter of missing motivations to be expunged if only we could find the perfect clue. It is built in. It is evidently an important part of what the play wishes us to say. And it is certainly an element that the play thrusts upon us from the opening word. Everyone, I think, recalls the mysteriousness of that first scene, the cold middle of the night on the castle platform, the muffled sentries, the uneasy atmosphere of apprehension, the challenges leaping out of the dark, the questions that follow the challenges, feeling out of the darkness, searching for identities, for relations, for assurance. Bernardo, have you had a quiet guard? Who hath relieved you? What? Is Horatio there? What? Has this thing appeared again tonight? Looks it not like the king? How now, Horatio? Is it this not something more than fantasy? What think you on it? Is it not like the king? Why this same strict and most observant watch? Shall I strike it with my partisan? Do you consent we shall acquaint young Hamlet with it? We need not be surprised that critics and playgoers alike have been tempted to see in this evocation not simply of Hamlet's world, but of their own. Man in his aspect of bafflement, moving in darkness on a rampart between two worlds, unable to reject or quite accept the one that, when he faces it, to shakes his disposition with thoughts beyond the reaches of his soul, comforting himself with hints and guesses. We hear these hints and guesses whispering through the darkness of the several watchers. As the several watchers speak. At least the whisper goes so, says one. I think it be no other but e'en so, says another. I have heard that on the crowing of the cock the extravagant and erring spirit hies to his confine, says a third. Some say, at Christmas time, this bird of dawning sings all the night, and then they say no spirit dare stir abroad. So I have heard, says the first, and do in part believe it. However we choose to take the scene, it is clear that it creates a world where uncertainties are of the essence. Meantime, such is Shakespeare's economy, a second attribute of Hamlet's world has been put before us. This is the problematic nature of reality and the relation of reality to appearance. The play begins with an appearance of an apparition, to use Marcellus's term of the ghost, and the ghost is somehow real, indeed the vehicle of realities. Through its revelation, the glittering surface of Claudius's court is pierced, and Hamlet comes to know, and we do, that the king is not only hateful to him, but the murderer of his father, that his mother is guilty of adultery as well as incest. Yet there is a dilemma in the revelation, for possibly the apparition is an apparition, a devil, who has assumed his father's shape. This dilemma, once established, recurs on every hand. From the court's point of view, there is Hamlet's madness. Polonius investigates and gets some strange advice about his daughter. Conception is a blessing, but as your daughter may conceive, friend, look to it. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern investigate and get the strange confidence that man delights not me. No, nor woman neither. Ophelia is loosed to Hamlet, Polonius's vulgar word, while Polonius and the king hide behind the heiress. And what they hear is a strange indictment of human nature and a riddling threat. Those that are married already, all but one, shall live. On the other hand, from Hamlet's point of view, there is Ophelia, kneeling here at her prayers. She seems the image of innocence and devotion. Yet she is of the sex for whom he has already found the name of frailty, and she is also, as he seems either madly or sanely to divine, a decoy, a trick. The famous cry, "Get thee to a nunnery," shows the anguish of his uncertainty. If Ophelia is what she seems, this dirty-minded world of murder, incest, lust, adultery is no place for her. Were she as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, she could not escape calumny. And if she is not what she seems, then a nunnery in its other sense of a brothel is relevant to her. The scene that follows, he treats her as if she were indeed an inmate of a brothel. A quick note here, Maynard Mack is assuming that his audience of graduate students and professors and academics already know that nunnery is also an Elizabethan euphemism for a brothel. So Hamlet could mean a religious institution, or he could mean a brothel, or he could mean both when he says, "Get thee to a nunnery." Back to Maynard Mack. Likewise, from Hamlet's point of view, there is the enigma of the king. If the ghost is only an appearance, then possibly the king's appearance is reality. He must try it further by means of a second and different kind of apparition, that is, the play within the play. He does so. But then immediately after, he stumbles on the king at prayer. This appearance has such relish of salvation in it. If the king dies now, his soul may yet be saved. Yet actually, as we know, the king's efforts to come to terms with heaven have been unavailing. His words fly up, his thoughts remain below. If Hamlet means the controversial revengers, if Hamlet means the conventional revenger's reasons that he gives for sparing Claudius, it was the perfect moment not to spare him, when the sinner was acknowledging his guilt yet unrepentant. The perfect moment, but it was hidden from him, like so much else in the play, behind an heiress. There are two heiresses in his mother's room. Hamlet thrusts his sword through one of them. Now, at last, he has got to the heart of the evil, so he thinks. But now it is the wrong man. Now he himself is a murderer. The other heiress he stabs through with his words, like daggers, says the queen. He makes her shrink under the contrast he points between her present husband and his father. But as the play now stands, matters are somewhat clearer in the bad quarto. It is hard to be sure how far the queen grasps the fact that her second husband is the murderer of her first, and it is hard to say what may be signified by her inability to see the ghost, who now, for the last time, appears. In one sense, at least, the ghost is the supreme reality, representative of the hidden ultimate power, in Bradley's terms, witnessing from beyond the grave against this hollow world. Yet, the man who is capable of seeing through this reality, through to this reality, the queen thinks is mad. "To whom do you speak?" she cries to her son. "Do you see nothing there?" he asks, incredulous, and she replies, "Nothing at all, yet all that is I see." Here, certainly, we have the imperturbable self-confidence of the worldly world, its layers on layers of habituation, so that when the reality is before its very eyes, it cannot detect its presence. The implication to step out of the Mack here being that Gertrude is so caught up in worldly pleasures and the appearances of things and shallow thinking that she cannot see what is true, the ghost representing the supreme reality of that truth. Back to Mack. Like mystery, this problem of reality is central to the play and written deep into its idiom. Shakespeare's favorite terms in Hamlet are words of ordinary usage that pose the question of appearances in a fundamental form. Apparition, I have already mentioned. Another term is seems. We may say, as Ophelia says of Hamlet leaving her closet, he seemed to find his way without his eyes. We mean one thing. When we say, as Hamlet says to his mother in the first court scene, seems, madam, I know not seems, we mean another. And when we say, as Hamlet says to Horatio before the play within the play, and after we will both our judgments join in censure of his seeming, we mean both at once. The ambiguities of seem, coil, and uncoil throughout this play, and over against them is set the idea of seeing. So Hamlet challenges the king in his triumphant letter announcing his return to Denmark. Tomorrow I shall beg leave to see your kingly eyes. Yet seen itself can be ambiguous, as we recognize from Hamlet's uncertainty about the ghost, or from the statement of his mother's already quoted, nothing at all, yet all that is I see. Another term of like importance is assume. What we assume may be what we are not. The devil hath power to assume a pleasing shape, but it may be what we are. If it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it. It may be what we are not, yet what we would become. Thus Hamlet's advice to his mother, assume a virtue if you have it not. The perplexity in the word points to a real perplexity in Hamlet's and in our own experience. We assume our habits, and habits are like costumes, as the word implies. My father, in his habit as he lived. Yet these habits become ourselves in time. That monster custom who all sense doth eat, of habits evil is angel, yet in this, that to the use of actions fair and good he likewise gives a frock or livery that aptly is put on. Two other terms I wish to instance are put on and shape. The shape of something is the form under which we are accustomed to apprehend it. Do you see yonder cloud that's almost in the shape of a camel? But a shape may also be a disguise. Even in Shakespeare's time, an actor's costume or an actor's role. This is the meaning when the king says to Laertes as they lay the plot against Hamlet's life, weigh what convenience both of time and means may fit us to our shape. Put on supplies an analogous ambiguity. Shakespeare's mind seems to worry this phrase in the play, much as Hamlet's mind worries the problem of acting in a world of surfaces, or the king's mind worries the meaning of Hamlet's transformation. Hamlet has put on an antic disposition. That the king knows. But what does put on mean? A mask, or a frock, or a livery, our habit? The king is left guessing, and so are we. What is found in the play's key terms is also found in its imagery. Miss Spurgeon has called attention to a pattern of disease images in Hamlet, to which I shall return. But the play has other patterns equally striking. One of these, as my earlier quotations hint, is based on clothes. In the world of surfaces to which Shakespeare exposes us in Hamlet, clothes are naturally a factor of importance. The apparel oft proclaims the man, Polonius assures Laertes, cataloging maxims in the young man's ear as he is about to leave for Paris. Oft, but not always, and so he sends this man Rinaldo to look into Laertes' life, even if need be to put a false dress of accusation upon his son. What forgeries you please, the better by indirections to find directions out. On the same grounds, he takes Hamlet's vows to Ophelia as false apparel. They are bawdy, he tells her. Or if we do not like Theobald's emendation, they are bonds in masquerade. Not of that dye which their investments show, but mere implorators of unholy suits. The breach between the outer and the inner stirs no special emotions in Polonius, because he is always either behind an heiress or prying into one. but it shakes Hamlet to the core. Here, so recently was his mother in her widow's weeds, the tears still flushing in her galled eyes, yet now within a little month, before even her funeral shoes are old, she's married with his uncle. Her mourning was all clothes. Not so his own. He bitterly replies when she asks him to cast his nighted color off. "'Tis not my inky cloak, good mother." And not alone, he adds, the sighs, the tears, the dejected behavior of the visage, that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play, but I have that within which passes show. These are but the trappings and the suits of woe. What we must not overlook here is Hamlet's visible attire, giving the verbal imagery a theatrical extension. Hamlet's apparel now is his inky cloak, mark of grief for his father, mark also of his character as a man of melancholy, mark possibly too of his being one in whom appearance and reality are attuned. Later, in his madness, with his mind disordered, he will wear costume in a corresponding disarray, the disarray that Ophelia describes so vividly to Polonius and that producers of the play rarely give sufficient heed to. Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all embraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, ungartered, and down givey to his ankle. Here the only question will be, as with the madness itself, how much is studied, how much is real? Still later, by a third costume, the simple traveler's garb in which we find him new come from shipboard, Shakespeare will show us that we have a third aspect of the man. A second pattern of imagery springs from terms of painting. The paints, the colorings, the varnishes that may either conceal or, in the painter's art, reveal. Art, in Claudius, conceals. The harlot's cheek, he tells us in one of his asides, beautied with the plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Art in Ophelia, loosed to Hamlet in the episode already noticed, to which this speech of the king's is prelude, is more complex. She looks so beautiful. The celestial in my soul's idol, the most beautified Ophelia, Hamlet has called her in his love letter. But now, what does beautified mean? Perfected with all the innocent beauties of a lovely woman, or beautied like the harlot's cheek? I have heard of your paintings too well enough. God hath given you one face, and you make yourselves another. Yet art, differently used, may serve the truth. By using an image, his own word, of a murder done in Vienna, Hamlet cuts through to the king's guilt, holds, as it were, a mirror up to nature, shows virtue her own features, scorn her own image, and the very age and body of the time, which is out of joint, his form and pressure. Something similar he does again in his mother's bedroom, painting for her in words the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, making her recoil in horror from his counterfeit presentment of two brothers, and holding, if we may trust a stage tradition, his father's picture beside his uncle's. Here again, the verbal imagery is realized visually on the stage. The most pervasive image, however, of Shakespeare's image patterns in this play is the pattern evolved around three words: show, act, play. Show seems to be Shakespeare's unifying image in Hamlet. Through it, he pulls together and exhibits in a single focus much of the diverse material of his play. The idea of seeming, assuming, and putting on, the image of clothes, painting, mirroring, the episode of the dumb show and the play within the play, the characters of Polonius, Laertes, Ophelia, Claudius, Gertrude, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Hamlet himself. All these, at one time or another, and usually more than once, are drawn into the range of implications flung around in the play by show. Act, on the other hand, I take to be the play's radical metaphor. It distills various perplexities about the character of reality into a residual perplexity about the character of an act. What, this play asks again and again, is an act? What is its relation to the inner act, the intent? If I drown myself wittingly, says the clown in the graveyard, it argues an act, and an act hath three branches. It is to act, to do, to perform. Or again, the play asks, how does action relate to passion? That lapsed in time and passion I can let go. By the important acting of your dread command, and to thought which can so sickly o'er the native hue of resolution that enterprises of great pitch and moment with this regard their currents turn awry and lose the name of action, and to words which are not acts. And so we dare not be content to unpack our hearts with them, and yet are acts of a sort. For we may speak daggers, though we use none. Or still again, how does an act, a deed, relate to an act, a pretense? For an action may be nothing but pretense. So Polonius, studying Ophelia for the interview with Hamlet, with pious action, as he phrases it, sugared o'er the devil himself. Or it may not be a pretense, yet not what it appears. So Hamlet spares the king, finding him in an act that has some relish of salvation in it. Or it may be a pretense that it is also the first foothold of a new reality, as when we assume a virtue, though we have it not. Or it may be a pretense that it is actually a mirroring of reality, like the play within a play, or the tragedy of Hamlet itself. To this network of implications, the third term, play, adds an additional dimension. Play is a more precise word, in Elizabethan parlance at least. For all the elements in Hamlet that pertain to the art of theater, and it extends their field of reference till we see that every major personage in the tragedy is a player in some sense, and every major episode a play. The court plays. Hamlet plays. The players play. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern try to play on Hamlet, though they cannot play his recorders. Here we have an extension to a musical sense. And the final duel, by a further extension, becomes itself a play in which everyone but Claudius and Laertes plays his role in ignorance. The queen desires you to show some gentle entertainment to Laertes before you fall to play. I will this brother's wager frankly play. Give him the cup. I'll play this bout first. The full extension of this theme is best evidenced in the play within the play itself. Here, in the bodily presence of these traveling players, bringing with them the latest playhouse gossip out of London, we have suddenly a situation that tends to dissolve the normal barriers between the fictive and the real. For here on the stage before us is a play of false appearances, in which an actor called the Player King is playing. But there is also on stage Claudius, another player king, who is a spectator of the player. And there is on stage, besides a prince, who is a spectator of both these player kings, who plays with great intensity a player's role himself. And around these kings and that prince is a group of courtly spectators, Gertrude, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, Polonius, and the rest. And they, as we have come to know, are players too. And lastly, there are ourselves, an audience, watching all these audiences who are also players, where it may suddenly occur to us to ask, does the playing end? Which are the guilty creatures sitting at a play? When is an act not an act? The mysteriousness of Hamlet's world, while it pervades the tragedy, finds its point of greatest dramatic concentration in the first act, and its symbol in the first scene. The problems of appearance and reality also pervade the play as a whole, but come to a climax in Acts 2 and 3, and possibly their best symbol is the play within the play. Our third attribute, though again it is one that crops out everywhere, reaches its full development in Acts 4 and 5, it is not easy to find an appropriate name for this attribute, but perhaps mortality will serve, if we remember to mean by mortality the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, not simply death. The powerful sense of mortality in Hamlet is conveyed to us, I think, in three ways. First, there is the play's emphasis on human weakness, the instability of human purpose, the subjection of humanity to fortune, all that we might call the aspect of failure in man. Hamlet opens his theme in Act 1 when he describes how from that single blemish, perhaps not even the victim's fault, a man's whole character may take corruption. Claudius dwells on it, and again, to an extent that goes far beyond the need of the occasion, while engaged in seducing Laertes to step behind the arras of a seamer's world and dispose of Hamlet by a trick. Time qualifies everything, Claudius says, including love, including purpose. As for love, it has a pleurisy in it and dies of its own too much. As for purpose, that we would do, we should do, when we would. For this would changes, and hath abatements and delays, as many as there are tongues, our hands, our accidents, and then this should is like a spendthrift's sign that hurts by easing. The player king, in his long speeches to his queen, in the play within the play, sets the matter in a still darker light. She means these protestations of undying love. She knows she means them. But our purpose depends on our memory, and our memory fades first. Or else, he suggests, we purpose something to ourselves in a condition of strong feeling, but then the feeling goes, and with it the resolve. Or else, our fortune changes, he adds, and with these our loves. The great man down you mark his favorite flies. The subjection of human aims to fortune is a reiterated theme in Hamlet, as subsequently in Lear. Fortune is the harlot goddess in whose secret parts men like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern live and thrive, the strumpet who threw down Troy and Hecuba in Priam, the outrageous foe whose slings and arrows a man of principle must suffer or seek release in suicide. Horatio suffers them with composure. He is one of the blessed few whose blood and judgment are so well commingled that they are not a pipe for fortune's finger to sound what stop she please. For Hamlet, the task is of a greater difficulty. Next, and intimately related to this matter of infirmity is the emphasis on infection, the ulcer, the hidden abscesses, the imposthume of much wealth and peace that inward breaks and shows no cause without why the man dies. Miss Spurgeon, who was the first to call attention to this aspect of the play, has well remarked that so far as Shakespeare's pictorial imagination is concerned, the problem in Hamlet is not a problem of the will and reason, of a mind too philosophical or a nature too temperamentally unfitted to act quickly, nor even a problem of an individual at all. Rather, it is a condition for which the individual himself is apparently not responsible, any more than the sick man is to blame for the infection which strikes and devours him, but which, nevertheless, in its course and development, impartially and relentlessly annihilates him and others, innocent and guilty alike. That, she adds, is the tragedy of Hamlet, as it is perhaps the chief tragic mystery of life. This is a perceptive comment, for it reminds us that Hamlet's situation is mainly not of his own manufacture, as are the situations of Shakespeare's other tragic heroes. He has inherited it. He is born to set it right. We must not, however, neglect to add to this what another student of Shakespeare's imagery has noticed, that the infection in Denmark is presented alternatively as poison. Here, of course, responsibility is implied, for the poisoner in the play is Claudius. The juice he pours into the ear of the elder Hamlet is a combined poison and disease, a leprous distilment that curds the thin and wholesome blood. From this fatal center, unwholesomeness spreads out till there is something rotten in all Denmark. Hamlet tells us that his wit's diseased. The queen speaks of her sick soul. The king is troubled by the hectic in his blood. Laertes meditates revenge to warm the sickness in my heart. The people of the kingdom grow muddied, thick, and unwholesome in their thoughts, and even Ophelia's madness is said to be the poison of deep grief. In the end, all save Ophelia die of that poison in a literal as well as figurative sense. But the chief form in which the theme of mortality reaches us, it seems to me, is as a profound consciousness of loss. Hamlet's father expresses something of the kind when he tells Hamlet how his most seeming virtuous queen, betraying a love which was of the dignity that it went hand in hand even with the vow I made to her in marriage, had chosen to decline upon a wretch whose natural gifts were poor to those of mine. Oh, Hamlet, what a falling off was there. Ophelia expresses it again on hearing Hamlet's denunciation of love and woman in the nunnery scene, which she takes to be the product of a disordered brain. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown! The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mould of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. The passage invites us to remember that we have never actually seen such a Hamlet, that his mother's marriage has brought a falling off in him before we meet him. And then there is that further falling off, if I may call it so, when Ophelia too goes mad, divided from herself and her fair judgment, without the which we are mere pictures or beasts. Time was, the play keeps reminding us, when Denmark was a different place. That was before Hamlet's mother took off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love and set a blister there. Hamlet then was still the expectancy and the rose of the fair state, Ophelia the rose of May. For Denmark was a garden then, when his father ruled. There had been something heroic about his father, a king who met the threats to Denmark in open battle, fought with Norway, smote the sledded Polacks on the ice, slew the elder Fortinbras in an honorable trial of strength. There had been something godlike about his father, too. Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars, a station like the herald Mercury. But the ghost reveals a serpent was in the garden, and the serpent that did I sting thy father's life now wears his crown. The martial virtues are put by now. The threats to Denmark are attended to by policy, by agents working deviously for and through an uncle. The moral virtues are put by too. Hyperion's throne is occupied by a vice of kings, a king of shreds and patches. Hyperion's bed by a satyr, a paddock, a bat, a jib, a bloat king with reechy kisses. The garden is unweeded now and grows to seed things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. Even to himself he feels the taint of being his mother's son, and that other taint from an earlier garden, of which he admonishes Ophelia, our virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish in it. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? What should such fellows as I do, crawling between earth and heaven? Hamlet is painfully aware, says Professor Tilliard, of the baffling human predicament between the angels and the beasts, between the glory of having been made in God's image and the incrimination of being descended from fallen Adam. To this we may add, I think, that Hamlet is more than aware of it. He exemplifies it, and it is for this reason that his problem appeals to us so powerfully as an image of our own. Hamlet's problem, in its crudest form, is simply the problem of the avenger. He must carry out the injunction of the ghost and kill the king. But this problem, as I ventured to suggest at the outset, is presented in terms of a certain kind of world. The ghost's injunction to act becomes so inextricably bound up for Hamlet with the character of the world in which the action must be taken, its mysteriousness, its baffling appearances, its deep consciousness of infection, frailty, and loss, that he cannot come to terms with either without coming to terms with both. When we first see him in the play, he is clearly a very young man, sensitive and idealistic, suffering the first shock of growing up. He is taken the garden at face value, we may say, supposing mankind to be only a little lower than the angels. Now in his mother's hasty and incestuous marriage, he discovers evidence of something else, something bestial, though even a beast, he thinks, would have mourned longer. Then comes the revelation of the ghost, bringing a second shock. Not so much because he now knows that his serpent uncle killed his father. His prophetic soul had almost suspected this. Not entirely even because he knows now how far below the angels humanity has fallen in his mother, and how lust, these were the ghost's words, brought to a radiant angel-linked will sate itself in a celestial bed and prey on garbage. Rather because he now sees everywhere, but especially in his own nature, the general taint taking from life its meaning, from woman her integrity, from the will its strength, turning reason into madness. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? What should such fellows as I do crawling between earth and heaven? Hamlet is not the first young man to have felt the heavy and weary weight of all this unintelligible world, and, like the others, he must come to terms with it. The ghost's injunction to revenge unfolds a different facet of his problem. The young man, growing up, is not allowed to simply endure a rotten world. He must also act in it. Yet, how to begin? Among so many enigmatic surfaces, even Claudius, whom he now knows to be the core of the ulcer, has a plausible exterior, and around Claudius, swathing the evil out of sight, he encounters all those other exteriors, as we have seen, some of them already deeply infected beneath, like his mother. Some noble, but marked for infection, like Laertes. Some not particularly corrupt, but infinitely corruptible, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Some mostly weak and foolish, like Polonius and Osric. Some, like Ophelia, innocent, yet in their innocence still serving to skin and film the ulcerous place. And this is not all. The act required of him through retributive justice is not one that necessarily involves the doer in the general guilt, not only because it involves a killing, but because to get at the world of seeming, one must sometimes have to use its weapons. He himself, before he finishes, has become a player, has put on an antic disposition, has killed a man, the wrong man, has helped drive Ophelia mad, and has sent two friends of his youth to deaths, mining below their mines and hoisting the engineer with his own petard. He never meant to dirty himself with these things, but from the moment of the ghost's challenge to act, this dirtying was inevitable. It is the condition of living at all in such a world. To quote Polonius, "Who knew that this world so well men became a titled little soldiering in the working? Here is another matter with which Hamlet has to come to terms. Human infirmity. All that I have discussed with reference to instability, infection, loss, supplies the problem with its third phase. Hamlet has not only to accept the mystery of man's condition between the angels and the brute beasts, and not only to act in a perplexing and soiling world, he has also to act within the human limits, with the shabby equipment always deteriorating, if I may adapt some phrases from Eliot's East Coker, in the general mess of impression of feeling, undisciplined squads of emotions. Hamlet is aware of that fine poise of body and mind. Feeling and thought that suits the action to the word to the action. That acquires and begets a temperance in the very torrent, tempest, and whirlwind of passion, but he cannot at first achieve it in himself. He vacillates between undisciplined squads of emotions and thinking too precisely on the event. He learns to his cost how easily action can be lost in acting, and loses it there for a time himself. But these again are only the terms of every man's life. As Anatole France reminds us in a now famous apostrophe to Hamlet, what one of us thinks without contradiction and acts without incoherence? What one of us is not mad? What one of us does not say with a mixture of pity, comradeship, admiration, and horror? Good night, sweet prince. In the last act of the play, or so it seems to me, for I know there can be differences on this point, Hamlet accepts his world, and we discover a different man. Shakespeare does not outline for us the process of acceptance any more than he had done with Romeo or was to do with Othello, but he leads us strongly to expect an altered Hamlet and then, in my opinion, provides him. We must recall that at this point, Hamlet has been absent from the stage during several scenes, and that such absences in Shakespearean tragedy usually warn us to be on the watch for a new phase in the development of the character. It is so when we leave King Lear in Gloucester's farmhouse and find him again in Dover Fields. It is so when we leave Macbeth in the Witch's Cave and rejoin him at Dunsinane, hearing of the armies that beset it. Furthermore, and this is an important matter in the theater, especially important in a play in which the symbolism of clothing has figured largely, Hamlet now looks different. He's wearing different dress. Probably, as Granville Barker thinks, his sea gown scarfed about him. But in any case, no longer the disordered costume of his antic disposition. The effect is not entirely dissimilar to that in Lear, when the old king wakes out of his madness to find fresh garments on him. Still more important, this is not a matter of the way we take the passage. Still more important, Hamlet displays a considerable change of mood. This is not a matter of the way we take the passage about defying augury, as Mr. Tilliard, among others, seems to think. It is a matter of Hamlet's whole deportment, in which I feel we may legitimately see the deportment of a man who has been illuminated in the tragic sense. Bradley's term for it is fatalism. But if this is what we wish to call it, we must at least acknowledge that it is fatalism of a very distinctive kind, a kind that Shakespeare has been willing to touch with the associations of the saying in St. Matthew about the fall of a sparrow, and with Hamlet's recognition that a divinity shapes our ends. The point is not that Hamlet has suddenly become religious. He has been religious all through the play. The point is that he has now learned and accepted the boundaries in which human action, human judgment, are enclosed. Till his return from the voyage, he had been trying to act beyond these, had been encroaching on the role of providence. If I may exaggerate to make a vital point, he had been too quick to take the burden of the whole world and its condition upon his limited and finite self. Faced with a task of sufficient difficulty in its own right, he had dilated it into a cosmic problem, as indeed every task is. But if we think about this too precisely, we cannot act at all. The whole time is out of joint, he feels. And in his young man's egocentricity, he will set it right. Hence he misjudges Ophelia, seeing in her only a breeder of sinners. Hence he misjudges himself, seeing himself as vermin crawling between earth and heaven. Hence he takes it upon himself to be his mother's conscience, though the ghost has warned that this is no fit task for him, and returns to repeat the warning, "Leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge." Even with the king, Hamlet has sought to play at God. It must be he who decides the issue of Claudius's salvation, saving him for a more damnable occasion. Now he has learned that there are limits to and the before and after that human reason can comprehend. Rashness even is sometimes good, though rashness has saved his life from the commission for his death. And praised be rashness for it. The happy circumstance and the unexpected arrival of the pirate ship make it plain that the roles of life are not entirely self-assigned. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them how we will. Hamlet is ready now for what may happen, seeking neither to foreknow nor to avoid it. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. The crucial evidence of Hamlet's new frame of mind, as I understand it, is the graveyard scene. Here, in its ultimate symbol, he confronts, recognizes, and accepts the condition of being man. It is not simply that he now accepts death, though Shakespeare shows him accepting it in ever more poignant forms, first in the imagined persons of the politician, the courtier, and the lawyer, who laid their little schemes to circumvent God, as Hamlet puts it, but now lie here, then in Yorick, whom he knew and played with as a child, and then in Ophelia. This last death tears from him a final cry of passion. But the striking contrast between his behavior and Laertes' reveals how deeply he has changed. Still, it is not the fact of death that invests this scene with its peculiar power. It is instead the haunting mystery of life itself that Hamlet's speeches point to, holding in its inscrutable folds those other mysteries that he has wrestled with for so long. These he now knows for what they are and lays them by. The mystery of evil is present here, for this is after all the universal graveyard where, as the clown says humorously, he holds up Adam's profession, where the scheming politician, the hollow courtier, the tricky lawyer, the emperor and the clown, and the beautiful young maiden all come together in an emblem of the world, where even Hamlet murmurs, one might expect to stumble on Cain's jawbone that did the first murder. The mystery of reality is here too, for death puts the question, what is real, in its irreducible form, and in the end uncovers all appearances. Is this the fine of his fines and the recovery of his recovery, is to have his fine pate full of dirt? Now, get you to my lady's chamber and tell her, let her paint an inch thick, to this favor she must come. Or, if we need more evidence of this mystery, there is the anger of Laertes at the lack of ceremonial trappings, and the ambiguous character of Ophelia's own death. Is she to be buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? Asks the gravedigger. And last of all, but most pervasive of all, there is the mystery of human limitation. The grotesque nature of man's little joy, his big ambitions, the fact that the man who used to bear us on his back is now a skull that smells, that the noble dust of Alexander somewhere plugs a bunghole, that imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Above all, the fact that a pit of clay is meet for such a guest as man, as the gravedigger tells us in his song, and yet that despite all the frailties and limitations, that skull had a tongue in it and could sing once. After the graveyard and what it indicates has come to pass in him, we know that Hamlet is ready for the final contest of mighty opposites. He accepts the world as it is, the world as a duel in which, whether we know it or not, evil holds a poisoned rapier, and the poisoned chalice waits, and in which, if we win it at all, it is at the cost of nothing less than everything. I think we understand by the close of Shakespeare's Hamlet why it is that, unlike the other tragic heroes, he is given a soldier's rights upon the stage. For as William Butler Yeats once said, why should we honor those who die on the field of battle? A man may show as reckless a courage in entering into the abyss of himself. And there you have it, Maynard Mack's World of Hamlet. You can easily find the text with a Google search.